This is Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the Super Nintendo, and the game cartridge for this game is so big they could easily fit a turbocharger into it, taking the exhaust from the game and making it faster. Keep in mind, this is not Super, nor is it Hyper. It's not a special championship Alpha Omega SELE XEB spec Module A version. This is just Street Fighter 2 Turbo. My biggest concern is that they would have removed the bottle of vodka that the guy is chugging in the background.
You win!
And watch right there, note the lag. We'll talk about that later. Other than that, this game looks fantastic.
One, fight! Go back, fire!
By the way, this is the first Super Nintendo game ever to be reviewed on Classic Game Room. I decided to start with Street Fighter 2 because it's a game I know very well. I figured it was a great way to jump into the SNES. If you've been watching this series thus far, you'll know that I recently picked up a Super Nintendo for the first time in my life. I've been a Sega Genesis man, and I've had one since 1989. I recently reviewed Street Fighter 2 on the Sega Genesis, and I'll put together a whole separate video review where we compare the two different Street Fighter 2 versions, looking at them on screen at the same time. What you're looking at now is Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the SNES. And this looks and plays exactly like you would expect Street Fighter 2 to play, with the exception of one small problem, which is it does have lag. When you're shooting fireballs across the screen, or someone's shooting fireballs at you and there's jumping around and movement, surprisingly the game suffers from a good bit of slowdown right at that moment. But other than that, it looks and plays great. All of the character details and background details are there, and very well detailed. The stock Super Nintendo controller doesn't have the 6-button layout like the arcade, so one nice thing they do in the game is they give you the ability to assign different punches and kicks to different buttons in any way that you'd like to assign them. And apparently they've changed some of the dialogue. All of the features that you would expect Street Fighter 2 to have, this game has. It gives you the ability to increase the turbo speed of gameplay, which acts very similar to the hyper mode in the Sega Genesis version that I reviewed.
You win! Perfect!
You can increase or decrease the difficulty level. I'm fairly good at this game, but not great, so I like to play it somewhere in the middle range of difficulty. The Super Nintendo has 2 controller ports in the front of the game system so that you can invite your friends over and crush them at Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And overall, this is a classic video game and has a very nice treatment here on the Super Nintendo, with the exception of lag. I picked this game up for $2.50 recently, which I find to be a bargain. It's an excellent game, and one that has virtually unlimited gameplay with a nice variety of characters, locations, and 2-player mode, as well as a challenging computer opponent. Someone needs to tell Balrog that's not how you pick up women. Now there's all these television shows these days, like what are these rock stars doing now? You know, they were huge stars back in the mid-'80s or early '90s or something. And there's always two scenarios. They're either totally washed out on drugs and alcohol, or they're computer programmers living a happy family life. And of course, it's television. Nobody wants to see that. So the drugs and alcohol ones are far more interesting. My question is, what's happened to the characters in Street Fighter 2? They were celebrities so long ago. Now that there's so many other fighting games out there which have emulated Street Fighter 2, not as much attention is paid to our heroes of yesteryear like Chun-Li, Guile, Ken, and Ryu. Like if they bring Chun-Li back for Street Fighter 4, does she have to lose the 300 pounds she's gained from endorsing fast food restaurants and get back into fighting shape? Has she had 3 kids, or is she a totally coked out softcore porn star? These are questions I'd like to know the answer to. Maybe Capcom will address their stories in a future incarnation of Street Fighter. For instance, Guile, will he even show his face again after the Street Fighter 2 movie? Has Ken finally married Barbie? Is Honda now a hybrid? And that last joke was so bad, I can't believe I haven't even edited it out. Sinking to new depths. Anyway, you should go out and buy this game. It's cheap now and it's fun. As for me, I'm going to attempt to come up with some other corny half-assed jokes revolving around the character names, like what happens in Vega stays in Vega, M. Bison, the other red meat. I'll just stop while I'm ahead.